The silence following the final chord was more deafening than any ovation Marina had ever received. And when tears streamed down the wrinkled face of the Vienna Philharmonic's executive director, she knew her life had changed forever. But this transformation had begun 3 months earlier, on a gray March morning, as Marina Oliveira pushed a cleaning cart through the polished hallways of the National Conservatory of Music. The smell of disinfectant mingled with the aroma of old wood and forgotten sheet music, creating an atmosphere that both suffocated and comforted her. At 42, with hands roughened from scrubbing floors and gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, Marina was invisible to the young talents who hurried through the corridors with their gleaming instruments and gilded dreams. That particular morning, the sound of a piano drifted from rehearsal room 7, where Sebastian Volkov, the new Russian artistic director, was conducted a masterclass. Marina slowed her cleaning, allowing herself to listen through the ajar door. A young pianist struggled with a particularly difficult passage from Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, his hands stumbling over the intricate runs like a runner gasping for breath on a steep incline. "No, no, no," Volkov shouted, slapping the score against the piano. "You play like a machine. Where is the soul? Where is the passion that makes the heart bleed?" Marina closed her eyes. She knew that feeling of frustration, that desperate search for something that always seemed to slip through her fingers. Her own hands tingled involuntarily, as if they still held the memory of keys she hadn't touched in decades. "Mr. Volkov," the young pianist ventured, "perhaps if you could demonstrate—" "Demonstrate?" Volkov laughed bitterly. "I don't play anymore. Since the accident, my hands are useless for anything but pointing out other people's mistakes." Marina peered through the crack in the door at the conductor's hands. Long, elegant fingers, but trembling almost imperceptibly. Fine scars ran across his wrists, silent witnesses to a tragedy she didn't know, but recognized in the universal language of loss. The young pianist sighed, defeated. "Perhaps I just don't have enough talent for this." "Talent," Volkov murmured, "is only the beginning. What's missing is an understanding of the pain Rachmaninoff put into this music. You need to have lived to play it like that." Marina quietly moved on, but the conductor's words echoed in her mind for the rest of the day. As she cleaned bathrooms and emptied trash cans, she wondered if you really needed to have lived to play music that touched souls. She certainly had lived, perhaps more than she cared to remember. That night, in her small apartment in the suburbs, Marina sat down at the inexpensive digital piano she'd bought 2 years earlier, a luxury her cleaning salary barely allowed. It wasn't a Steinway, nor did it have the weight of real keys, but when she closed her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys, she could still remember the sound a real piano could produce. She started with simple scales, feeling the stiffness in her fingers gradually release. Then, almost without realizing it, her hands found the melody that had haunted her for months. The same Rachmaninoff passage the young pianist couldn't master. But when Marina played it, something different emerged. It wasn't technically perfect, far from it. Her hands were rusty, her technique compromised by years of neglect. But there was something in the music she produced, an indefinable quality that came from somewhere deep within her soul. The memories came like an avalanche. She was 7 years old when she first played the piano, in a small church where her grandmother took her on Sundays. The instrument was old and out of tune, but to Marina, it sounded like a portal to another world. She would sneak over to it during the breaks and services, her small fingers exploring the keys with the curiosity of a child discovering a secret language. "This girl has something special," the church organist told her grandmother. "She should study music." But studying music cost money they didn't have. Marina grew up stealing moments at the piano, at school, in music stores, anywhere she could find unprotected keys. At 15, she secured a partial scholarship to the conservatory, working as a cleaning assistant to pay for the rest of her tuition. She remembered Professor Henry Carter, an austere man who saw raw talent in her disorganized technique. "You have the gift," he told her one autumn afternoon, "but you need discipline. You need to sacrifice everything for music." And Marina sacrificed. She gave up friendships, parties, everything normal teenagers did. She practiced 8 hours a day, her fingers bleeding from playing. At 19, she won first place in the National Young Pianists competition. The future seemed infinite, full of illuminated stages and ecstatic audiences. Then came the accident. No, it wasn't really an accident. It was Carlos, the boyfriend she met at university. Carlos, who initially encouraged her, who said he loved her passion for music. Carlos, who gradually became jealous of the time she devoted to the piano. Carlos, who, one December night, after an argument about an important audition she couldn't miss, squeezed her hands too hard and said, "If you really love me, you'll stop this ridiculous obsession." The pressure he exerted on her fingers was calculated, precise. It didn't break bones, but it damaged tendons, leaving invisible scars that turned her hands into imprecise instruments. By the time she finally found the courage to leave him, months later, it was too late. The audition had passed, the scholarship was lost, and her hands would never be the same. Marina stopped playing, literally overnight. She put her sheet music in a box, sold her piano, and vowed to herself never to play another note. The music, once her oxygen, had become poison. She worked in shops, restaurants, offices, anywhere there were no pianos or memories of shattered dreams. Until, at 40, desperate for work after being laid off from yet another temporary job, she accepted the position of janitor at the conservatory. "It'll only be temporary," she told herself, "just until I find something better." But something better never appeared. Instead, she grew accustomed to the constant presence of music all around her, a bittersweet torture that daily reminded her of what she'd lost, but also kept her connected to the only world where she'd ever felt truly alive. Back in the present, Marina played the Rachmaninoff passage once more, this time allowing all the pain of the last 20 years to flow through her hands. The music that emerged was imperfect, technically flawed, but charged with an emotion so pure that she surprised herself. The next morning, Marina arrived at the conservatory earlier than usual. She wanted to finish cleaning rehearsal room 7 before classes began, but when she opened the door, she found Sebastian Volkov sitting at the piano, staring intently at the keys as if they could reveal universal secrets. "Excuse me," Marina said, preparing to leave. "I'll come back later." "No," he said without looking up. "Come in. I need company, even if it's from someone who doesn't understand music." Marina hesitated. "Actually, I studied music a long time ago." Volkov finally looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived at the conservatory. "You played?" "Piano." "Why did you stop?" The question hung in the air like a sustained note. Marina could have given an evasive answer, but something in the maestro's defeated posture made her feel she deserved honesty. "Someone broke me," she said simply. Volkov nodded slowly. "I understand. I was broken too. Car accident 3 years ago. Lost fine motor skills in my hands." He held up his hands, and Marina could see the subtle tremor he tried to hide. "Ironic, isn't it? I spent my whole life creating music, and now I can only teach it." They were silent for a moment, two shipwrecked souls recognizing each other on a deserted island. "Do you still play?" Volkov asked. "Not like before." "That wasn't what I asked." Marina took a deep breath. "Sometimes, at home, nothing serious." "Play something for me." "I can't. I'm not." "I don't care what you're not anymore. Play." Marina approached the piano with hesitant steps, as if she were walking toward a precipice. She sat on the bench and placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar weight under her fingers. She began with Chopin, a simple, safe nocturne. Her hands trembled slightly, and there were a few wrong notes, but the music flowed with a quality that made Volkov lean forward, captivated. "More," he said when she finished. "I don't—" "Rachmaninoff, Concerto No. 2, the passage the boy can't play." Marina swallowed hard. "I heard you yesterday, through the door." "So you know where he's going wrong." "He's trying to play with perfect technique, but he doesn't understand that this music isn't about perfection. It's about—" "About what?" Marina closed her eyes. "About loss. About what it's like to love something so deeply that losing it feels like it ends your life. About how you learn to live with that pain, carrying it like a scar that never fully heals." Her hands found the keys again, and this time there was no hesitation. The music that emerged was raw, painful, beautiful in a way that transcended technique. It was the music of someone who had truly lived every note, every pause, every moment of silence between the phrases. When she finished, Volkov was looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "You'll play at the year-end recital," he said. "I can't, I'm just a janitor." "You're a musician. You always were. The fact that you carry a mop doesn't change that." Marina shook her head. "Sebastian, I haven't played publicly in over 20 years. I can't just—" "You can, and you will." His voice held the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We have 4 months. It will be enough." And so began the most improbable transformation of Marina's career. Every morning, before the conservatory officially opened, she met Volkov in the rehearsal room. He couldn't play, but he could listen with ears trained by decades of experience. He could identify every nuance that needed refining, every emotion that wasn't yet being translated correctly. "No," he'd say when she tried to play a passage technically correct but emotionally empty. "You're hiding. Stop being afraid of the pain. The pain is your ally." Marina discovered that relearning to play was like learning to walk again after an injury. Her fingers had muscle memory, but decades of neglect had created barriers that needed to be broken down brick by brick. Some mornings, she left the practice sessions with aching hands and an even more wounded heart, reliving traumas she'd buried long ago. But there was something magical happening too. Each day, a small part of herself that she thought she'd lost forever returned. The music was no longer a source of pain, but a way to process and transform that pain into something beautiful. Gossip began to circulate through the conservatory. Some of the older staff vaguely remembered Marina from her student days and whispered in the hallways about the janitor who'd been seen playing piano with the artistic director. The students, initially skeptical, began to sneak near the rehearsal room during morning practices. "Who is she?" asked Sarah, a young violinist, after hearing Marina play a particularly emotive passage of Debussy. When the last note faded into the air, the silence that followed was absolute. Marina remained seated, hands still on the keys, her heart pounding like a drum. Then, from the back of the auditorium, applause began. It wasn't polite or perfunctory. It was applause that came from the depths, that acknowledged something extraordinary had happened. The audience rose like a wave, and the applause swelled into a standing ovation. Marina saw Volkov at the side of the stage, tears streaming down his face. She saw students who had doubted her applauding with genuine enthusiasm. She saw strangers who had been touched by her music in ways they couldn't explain. "We'd like to invite you to perform in Vienna," he continued, "not as a principal soloist, but as part of our Undiscovered Voices series. These are concerts that highlight musicians who bring unique perspectives to classical music." I don't know if I'm ready for that," Marina said. "Nobody's ever ready to realize their dreams," Mueller said with a smile. "But you've just proven you're ready for something more important, to play with truth." In the days that followed, Marina's life changed in ways she'd never imagined. Offers of performances began to pour in. Journalists wanted to interview the janitor's daughter who became a pianist. Conservatory students from across the country asked to study with her. But the most important change was internal. Marina had regained not only her ability to play, but her identity as a musician. She was no longer a janitor who played piano in her spare time. She was a pianist who had found her way back to music through a journey most people would never have the courage to undertake. 3 months later, Marina was in Vienna, backstage at the Musikverein's Golden Hall. It was the same feeling of nervousness from the conservation recital, but now it was mixed with a confidence she'd never experienced before. "Are you ready?" Volkov asked, having traveled to see her perform. "Yes," Marina said, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The concert was a revelation. The Viennese audience, known for its sophistication and demanding criticism, was captivated by the raw honesty of her performance. When Marina played her composition, Rebirth, some of the most respected musicians in Europe were among those who rose to applaud. After the concert, in the quiet of her hotel room, Marina sat down at her desk and began to write a letter she would never send. "Dear Carlos," she wrote, "you tried to break me, and for a long time I believed you had succeeded. But what you didn't understand is that sometimes, when something is broken just right, it can be rebuilt stronger than before. You tried to silence my music, but it only grew deeper, truer, waiting for the right moment to emerge again." She folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. Some words were too important to send. They were only for the writer, a way of closing circles that had remained open for too long. 6 months later, Marina was back at the conservatory, but now as a visiting professor. She still cleaned, not because she needed to, but because she had learned to find meditation in simple, honest work. But now she also taught, sharing not only musical technique, but something more precious, the courage to be vulnerable through art. In her classes, she told her students, "Perfect technique is important, but technique without soul is just exercise. You need to find your own breaks, your own pains, your own joys, and learn to transform them into music." One autumn afternoon, she was cleaning rehearsal room 7 when she heard a familiar sound, a young pianist struggling with the same Rachmaninoff passage that had been her own portal back to music. Marina stopped, smiling. She set her broom aside and knocked on the door. "Can I help?" she asked. The young man looked at her hopefully. "You're Marina Olsen, aren't you? The professor who played in Vienna?" "I am," she said, "but I'm also someone who once stood exactly where you are now, struggling with music that seems impossible to master." "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you make the music sound so alive?" Marina sat at the piano beside him. "First," she said, "you need to stop being afraid to make mistakes. Then you need to find what this music means to you personally." She placed her hands on the keys and played the problematic passage, not with technical perfection, but with an interpretation that carried decades of lived experience. The young pianist watched her with fascination, seeing how she transformed notes into narrative, technique into emotion. "Rachmaninoff wrote this piece when he was going through a deep depression," Marina explained. "He thought he would never be able to compose again. When he finally found inspiration again, he poured all his gratitude, all his relief, all his rediscovered joy into this music. You can't play this just with your fingers. You need to play it with the memory of what it's like to lose hope and find it again." The young man tried again, this time with less concern for technical perfection and more attention to the emotional story of the music. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. "Better," Marina said, "much better. Now you're telling a story, not just executing notes." As the sun set through the rehearsal room's high windows, Marina felt a deep peace settle in her heart. She had found her place in the world, not as the prodigy she once was, nor as the invisible janitor she had become, but as something new, a mentor who could guide others through the same turbulent waters she had navigated. In the years that followed, Marina would become known not only as a pianist, but as a revolutionary teacher who changed the way a generation of musicians thought about performance. Her methodology, which she called emotional technique, would spread to conservatories around the world. But in that moment, in the rehearsal room where it all had begun, she was simply doing what she had always been destined to do, transforming pain into beauty, silence into music, breakage into rebirth. When the young pianist left, promising to return next week, Marina was alone with the piano. She played the Rachmaninoff passage one last time, not as an exercise or demonstration, but as a prayer of gratitude, for the hands that had found their way back to the keys, for the music that had patiently awaited her return, for the journey that had taken her from the ashes of shattered dreams to a life richer and more authentic than she had ever imagined. The silence that followed was no longer the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completeness. Marina had found her way back not only to music, but to herself. And in that discovery, she had found something even more precious, the ability to help others find their own paths through the universal language of music. The piano keys gleamed in the golden light of the setting sun, waiting for the next story to be told through them. Marina smiled, knowing there would always be more stories to tell, more hearts to touch, more lives to transform through the eternal power of music. She had learned that no matter how many times you were broken, it was always possible to rebuild yourself. And sometimes, in the rebuilding, you discovered you were capable of creating something even more beautiful than the original, a symphony not of perfection, but of authenticity, courage, and reborn hope. The future stretched before her like an unwritten score, filled with infinite possibilities. And Marina Olsen, who once had been just a janitor who dreamed in silence, now knew that every note she played would be a celebration of the human capacity to overcome, to grow, to transform, even the deepest wounds into music that touched souls. Rehearsal Room 7, witness to her most improbable journey, would forever hold the echo of her transformation, a reminder that it's never too late to resume interrupted dreams, to forgive yourself for lost years, to discover that true music comes not from technical perfection, but from the courage to be vulnerable, authentic, and profoundly human. Marina tucked her sheet music away, switched off the lights, and left the room, knowing she would return the next day, not as an employee or a visitor, but as the keeper of a space where silent miracles happen every day, where ordinary people discovered they were capable of creating extraordinary beauty, where music continued to prove its ability to heal, transform, and lift the human spirit to the most sublime heights of experience.